Okay, we are on and running. It is June 10th, and this is Economics 202, Microeconomics. As you can see, I've got the Wall Street Journal up. The market is on the TV behind me, as it always is in this office. If you notice from my previous studio efforts, we've cleaned up in here a lot because this house is on the market, which might interest you. Maybe I'll put up the listing, and you can look through my house, our house. It's Kelly's house. Let's put it that way. But anyway, we're hoping to sell it before what I consider. My hope was to sell it before the election. This COVID thing came out of nowhere for me. My predictions, which, the future is unknowable, but nonetheless, I thought that this election cycle would end the stock market rally, and COVID ended it. But the Federal Reserve and politicians have blown up the bubble again, so the market is going up. You can see it's down a little today, but if you're interested, a lot of people want to know about the market because I trade the market. Let me tell you my theory, and we'll see if I'm wrong. But everybody's got a theory. I use this charting software if you're curious about that, and it's the best one I've found over the years. I like to use candlesticks. If you're not a finance major, this may or may not interest you, but I'll do it really quickly just to show you what I'm talking about. It seems to show up better on black, and we'll do 6 months of it, and here's what it'll look like. But each one of these little candlesticks, each one of these represents a day. Open, high, low, close, which may not mean anything to you if you've never seen them before. But you can see that the market, this is the S&P 500, is down 3.61 today. This is an index. It is a measure of 500 stocks. It's like a yardstick. It's just a measurement. Well, my current theory is, back in March, the end of February, when we hit the top, and then it began to collapse. You see this gap here that I'm pointing at? My theory is that we have to go up and cover up that gap. People who do what's called technical analysis, they look at charts and they read them like tea leaves. People like me, I use both fundamental and technical analysis. Fundamental analysis is things like macroeconomics and what's going on in the world, the fundamentals of the political realm and all of these things. Technical analysis strictly looks at the sort of voodoo of how charts react to everyday events. And what I'm thinking here is that we've printed enough money that we're going to go all the way back up to the top and cover up this hole. Whenever there's a hole in a chart, in general, they tend to get covered up. You may think that's cuckoo, but it plays out mathematically. And if you're a psych major, you want to check some of this crap out, because it's really interesting that it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that, because there's so many people that are looking at the chart, they actually make what they think is going to happen. Does that make sense? In sort of a groupthink way. But anyhow, so this is the S&P 500, all the stock price, 500 stocks, a representation of it. If it goes up to here, what I am guessing is that it's going to collapse again, because we are in fact in recession. And We have been since February, since here at least. COVID came along sort of as that was happening. So, but we were well on our way to recession before the COVID virus, which just accelerated it. Again, don't mistake the pin for the bubble, and the bubble was in asset prices to a large degree, and other places. But this represents the stock market. So anyway, I thought maybe you'd think that was fun to look at. Here we are down. We're waiting for the Federal Reserve. This is the Federal Reserve chairman. The Federal Reserve is a central bank. And if you know anything about banking, in this country, we have a system of banking called fractional reserve banking. And I know from your writing, there's more than one of you who maybe lean towards the libertarian way of thinking like myself. I've come to believe that fractional reserve banking is one of the great evils of central planning, and it has nothing to do with capitalism. You know, when you take people's deposits and you loan them out, you do so at your own risk and the risk of those depositors. But in this country, we have a central bank that backs up a what I consider an illegal system of fractional reserve banking. And so if you're a bank hater, you're in good company. I'm not. You know, when the president of J.P. Morgan stands, or the CEO stands up and says how wonderful banking is, I don't agree. So if you think the bailouts were terrible in 2008, I agree with you. I think that those banks should have failed, and that sort of thing. So we agree on that. But anyhow, okay, a little bit of housekeeping. If you haven't logged into Sapling yet, you better get over there and get going. You're 4 chapters behind, and I just put up chapters 5 and 6. Here they are. I'm sorry, I should have put them up. I started to put them up last night, but my internet was, I've been having technical difficulties in my studio, but it took me a while to get, I had to unplug this PC, which is I have a kick-ass PC under here, but it doesn't matter because the bottleneck is the internet. And so I've been having trouble with Macmillan. Anyway, I got this stuff up, and you should be able to do it. I see that, you know, I can go right in here and look and see everyone's grades, and that they're keeping up. You see how slow this is. But right, I can go into individuals and get student reports on each one of you. This one's on me. I haven't done shit, so but I'm not gonna either. But anyhow, that's how that works. And I can see you all together too. And I'm gonna return to my normal role, which is me. And if you want to see this, here's the whole grade book. Oops. Oh, that's what I do. I don't know what I did. I did it wrong. But anyway, I can see a grade book the same way that I can see a grade book in here and see that you're keeping up. If you are keeping up, you know that I graded a bunch of stuff, and I put comments in there as I grade them. I'd love to be that guy that was commenting on every discussion. You can see I graded all these, and I have to grade all these. So nonetheless, y'all did fine. If you didn't get to make a comment, and I gave you a 9 or something silly, go back and make some comments on other people's work, and I'll raise your grade. I want y'all to get good grades in here. Your stuff is fascinating. I mean, it's the highlight of my day. when I get time to go in there and look at what y'all are saying about a crazy discussion that I put up, and the way that you handled this one. I get this pushed into my phone, so it's almost like I keep up with them constantly. I want to go to the discussion as it was in the thing. Brian said something very interesting there. Of course, he and I, Brian, you and I agree on a few things because, of course, he sort of identifies as a libertarian. Um, I hope you listen to John Haidt. It just nails down that need for heterodoxy. I got to tell you, I read what the president of this our institution, it's yours as well as mine. This is a taxpayer institution, and you have a say in what goes on here, especially if you stay in the valley and live here. I'm appalled at our president. I disagree with her vehemently in the idea that we are a heterodox academy. We are trained. We are training young adults or adults or students, if you will, to look at both sides of an issue, not just go into something and go, oh, this guy died at the hands of the police, so therefore racism. That's not what we do, and that's not certainly not who I am. And I'm going to tell you something very personal. And I think I mentioned this last lecture. I'm a recovered alcoholic, and my interactions with the police were not always pleasant. And I'm not a pleasant person when I use drugs and drink alcohol. So when I saw this guy get killed, the first thing I thought to myself was, there goes another addict, who scared the police. If you were there at my last arrest, if you were amongst the 7 cops at my last arrest in Clear Creek County, and you would know when I went back and made amends to those officers, one of which was a female, they were scared of me, 5'9", 128 pounds of me back then, wired out on drugs. So be very careful about judging the police and judging people that are in those situations, in detoxes and emergency rooms, who deal with the mentally disturbed and the addicts and alcoholics that they have to deal with every day. When I made amends to those guys and women, they said, oh, we weren't scared of you, but I could see them shaking, and I blew a 4-7 that night. So don't, this is a tragedy all the way around, but be very careful to rush to judgment over, how the police act. And I think, everybody here knows a civil servant, and everybody here knows an addict or an alcoholic. So to make someone into a martyr in that situation, I think is to make anyone a martyr is not a good idea. Certainly, had I died that night, it wouldn't have been the cops' fault. It would have been mine. So we went out, we did this how much policing do we really need thing. And I got to tell you, I'm in a really tough spot, because not only do I bring that recovered alcoholic game, that experience to the table, but I'm also a libertarian. So I'm really concerned about the militarization of the police forces. And I was one, when I began to study this problem, when the, way back when Obama began campaigning, and he did this Father's Day thing, and he started talking about the problems with fatherhood in the Black community. I put this speech up for you. I hope you listen to it, because he turned out, I think, to be a very divisive president. I hope you also listen to Larry Elder and Mr. Rubin. Larry Elder put the numbers to this. The Washington Post put the numbers to this. David Webb is very eloquent on this subject. Of course, Tom Sowell is very eloquent on egalitarianism, and those old firing lines are really historically correct. Jason Riley today, he's on the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, and a brilliant guy. You can't walk into my house and say Jason Riley's an asshole. I'm just not going to listen to that. He wrote an op-ed piece in the Journal today. I'm sure you can find it online. Jason gives the statistics on this, and Jason, I think this is a great talk here. Shelby Steele and Jason together give a talk, and Barriers to Black Progress. These are great. How Americans' past sins have polarized our country. I'm of the opinion that Mr. Obama had a great chance to do something very special in this country, and he didn't do it. That's just my opinion, and I voted for him twice. So, do I regret that? No, I think it was very important, but I think he was the wrong guy. I think he's an Alinskyite, and if you study Saul Alinsky, those people are interested in creating division. We've got it going on in this valley, and somewhat with the Latino community. There's a thing called the Manwas Project, Mountain Voices. It's all about dividing people, in my opinion. And the Latinos who are my friends, and believe me, I speak Spanish for a reason, and I think I told you some of that. They watch out for this. These people are socialists, and they have an agenda, and the agenda is division. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, if you get a chance to listen to Ayaan, she is the most brilliant, bar none, one of the most brilliant women I've ever, brilliant people. Forget about the fact that she's a woman.
They raped our
She's
women.
talking here
They
at the
took our
University of
property.
Colorado.
They
I listened
did
to
it
this
to
talk the
us,
other
we're
day,
doing it to them.
and it brought me to tears. She's so smart and so spot on. If you get a chance to listen to her, I'd listen to her read the phone book, but she's just, she's spot on this victimhood thing. She's a Somali. She escaped from an arranged marriage to a Al Qaeda leader, a terrorist, if you will, and so she's got a lot to say about being a woman, being a former Muslim, and what's going on in the Muslim community, and the need for reformation in the church, much like the Christian Reformation that took place a number of years ago. But nevertheless, in this particular talk, she's talking about victimhood, and it is a fantastic talk. So if you get a minute, that's one to listen to when you got your thinking cap on. Do that. Maybe I'll put it up on Macmillan or on Canvas so that you can grab it. Okay, if you're fretting over grades, cut it out. All right, we're going to take a break from discussion next week. If you feel like you're behind, catch up. I'm so impressed with all of this so far. Really great. It's good stuff. I'll make some more comments on your writing. For the most part, I'm always impressed with people's writing. Of course, now we're at the 200 level, so your writing should be pretty good. My expectations are that you make complete sentences. If English is your second language, and I know for some people it is, you're doing a fantastic job. I had to write in Spanish to get had a minor in Spanish, and I know how hard it is to write in a language that is not your own. So, you know, believe me, I'm watching and I'm impressed. All right, we're going to start out with chapter 4 and talk a little bit about consumer and producer surplus. Uh, as you can see, I have a collar on, but I'm cold in this house because it's cold. This is a cold summer, for God's sakes. Uh, anyway, that's why I'm wearing a sweatshirt. Consumer, I turn off my furnace in the summer. I don't know about you, but I'm cheap. Consumer and producer surplus. You're going to have to do some math problems for this particular chapter. And again, I'm not really thrilled with the math. I don't think it's necessary because consumer and producer surplus are subjective. It goes back to that idea that when I get a cup of coffee from Starbucks and I hand them, God, $5 or whatever the hell it is, everybody walks away happy. So it's hard to put a number on that. It's like udels. What the hell's a udel? No one knows what a udel is, but we want to measure it because in economics, we're trying to draw a parallel to hard sciences. And I don't think that's a good idea. I think that it's a social science and largely subjective. That's why the best way to look at economics is on the individual level, not the group level. Sound familiar? So the analysis of consumer surplus and producer surplus helps us understand why markets are usually efficient. They're usually efficient. You know, this goes to that idea that I disagree with Doctors Krugman and Wells, that there are all these inefficiencies everywhere. Inefficiencies are part of life. There's no utopia. The question is the inefficiency of the market worse or better than the inefficiency of the government solution to that inefficiency? And I think that, and I can prove to you empirically that government solutions are terrible. They haven't come up with a good one yet, hence our policing problem. Isn't it interesting, though, as we talk about policing, most people, even I was talking about Brian, say, well, geez, how would we do that if we, he's a believer in the free market too. If they defund the police and it becomes a supply and demand thing, what's going to happen? And I thought to myself, well, what you do is if you're not going to police a certain area of the city, or the police won't go there anymore, they become ineffective. Let's say that, because that certainly looks like it's going to happen in some areas of say, Minnesota or inner cities. You give that money back to the people that live there. And this is much the same idea as the voucher system for failing schools. You give that money back to those parents, and you give that money back to those you stop taxing them, stealing their money, and sending it to a big bureaucracy, whether it be a city council or whatever. And you say, okay, we suck, right? I'm representing the police. You've told us, message received loud and clear. A centralized police department causes too much racism, or if that's what you want to call it. I'm not buying that, but nonetheless, and the facts don't back that up. Nonetheless, there's a certain level of brutality that's produced by having too many police, or professionalizing it, or however you want to say that. Let's look at the alternative. Then you have some kind of community. You hire people from your community to be the policeman. Could that work? I think yes, and that's certainly what was done historically in this country. You know, it was like, well, we're going to get a sheriff in this town, you know, Dodge City or whatever. This occurred. You know, people hired someone, either an outsider whom they all agreed on, or someone from town who everyone's, you know, maybe it would have been Mr. Floyd. He had some experience with working. Of course, he couldn't stay sober. That was a real problem. But nonetheless, you would hire someone who you trust, who has the respect of people in town, and they end up being the sheriff, you know. So the idea that this hasn't been tried is wrong. It has been. That's where our roots are in this country. There was no such. The founding fathers didn't imagine a professional police force. So now, what would happen? What does that mean about consumer surplus? Well, the difference between the market price and what consumers as individuals would be willing to pay, that's the surplus, right? What would you pay for good policing? Are we underpaying them? I don't know. That's a great question. There's a lot of the other pressure on the whole policing thing is that a lot of these cities and states are broke, and they're broke because they have these pensions of civil servants, and so don't forget, this is a convenient way for politicians to cover up one of their errors, and everybody's talking about making police forces liable for the externalities they create, which would include brutality. Well, if everybody can be sued, I'm all for that. Everyone. That means if you're a politician, you should be liable for the errors that you make too. So I think that's good for everyone. Okay, back to this. Demand curve. Use textbooks, right? I'm going to make me smaller, right? The consumer's willingness to pay for a good is the maximum price at which he or she would buy that good. And you can see that what they're trying to show here is that everybody's different. You know, Alicia would pay for, you know, would pay more. Her willingness to pay is $59. Edwina is like $10. That's it. You know, so this is a very complicated way to look at a demand curve, but you get the picture here. You know, different people have different willingness to pay for items. They're trying to take care of something we call the value proposition. People value things differently. The classic example of this is diamonds and water. That's the classic. You know, why a diamond, you know, more expensive than water, when one of the water will keep you alive and diamonds are, as Murray Rothbard says, a mere frippery. You know, it's just it's for jewelry. It has some uses. You know, I have a diamond stylus on my turntable over there that conducts music. You know, conducts electrons for music, but nonetheless, and diamond saws and things like that. But most of the time, it's just, you know, frippery. So what would you pay? Well, turns out, you know, diamonds are a girl's best friend. I don't, you know, do women value diamonds more than men? I don't know. Would the demand curve for diamond look like this? You know, would all the dudes be at the bottom? Maybe. Some guys like diamonds. I'm not really enamored with them. Total consumer surplus is the entire shaded area. Here's the consumer surplus. The sum of the individual consumer surpluses of all these people. Here's your math, okay? All right, that's what you're going to figure out. So George, here's some math for you, right? He's considering purchasing new shirts. He's willing to pay $35, $25 for the second. Why? Well, the law of diminishing marginal returns, right? I'm not going to I don't want to. I don't need 3 shirts. I don't need 5 shirts. I need, well, maybe I'd need 5. But Oxford Clothiers, his favorite shirt is selling each for $28. What's the efficient number of shirts for him to buy, right? And you can go over that. It goes over it in the homework, and if you look through the also as you go through the files in the files area of Canvas, you can find this question and the answers, or a similar one. Consumer surplus is the area below the demand curve, but above the price. So here's the consumer. The price of the iPad goes up, the consumer surplus goes down, right? So at $1 million and $500, it's $1 million. All right. Simple enough. So as prices fall, of course, consumer surplus rises, right? So we have this increase in Brad's consumer surplus. We have an increase in Alicia's consumer surplus. As that price goes down, look at it, got bigger. Bing, bing, bing. So, from 30 to 25. So it increased by 15. The original price was 30. The new price was 20. So from 30 to 20, that increase in Alicia's consumer surplus would be $10, right? So everybody's consumer surplus. Darren's only increased $5 because he was all the way down here. His willingness to pay was only 25, and the price finally got down to 20. So he's a happy guy. All right. Here's how it looks in a demand curve graphic. So from 2000 to 500, this is an increase in the consumer surplus to the original buyers. This is the new buyers, right? As each incremental, if you look down here, as each incremental purchase occurs, the consumer surplus gained by the new buyers is represented in here. And we'll look at it in the aggregate in a minute. So, and here's the supply curve for used textbooks, right? And these are the potential sellers. And we're going to look at their surplus, right? So potential sellers, Engelbert's willing to sell his book at 45. They use this example because a lot of you are buying and selling used books, and you buy it at the beginning of the semester, and now we have this LMP program, which I'm against for obvious reasons. It's central planning, but nonetheless, it used to be that you'd buy a book maybe on Amazon used, and then you try and resell it. And hey, so producer surplus is the difference between the market price and the price at which firms are willing to supply the product. You can see some products for which the producer surplus is outrageously high. And this gets into the question, and it's sort of a moral question not sort of, it is a moral question. How much is a good profit? I cringed yesterday because I hadn't heard anything about price gouging legislation. And then suddenly I heard that there was every time there's an event like this, politicians rush to make a law about price gouging, not understanding that price gouging is necessary to protect supply. And if you've now looked at supply and demand curves and you're starting to look at meddling with markets, you're going to understand that when there's a hurricane or a COVID virus or whatever, price gouging is what protects supply, and it's a necessary function. The price function is a necessary function of the marketplace. So don't knock gouging. Anyway, that's why if you allow bottled water to go up to the price that you would call gouging, then people won't clear the shelves. They'll leave someone for someone else. Individual producer surplus is the net gain to an individual seller from selling a good. It's equal to the difference between the price received and the seller's cost. We already started talking about cost, right? Total producer surplus is the sum of the individual producer surpluses of all the sellers. This is a macro idea. Economists use the term producer surplus to refer both to individual and total, right? So here's how it looks on a table. Use textbook, $30. So potential seller Andrew would have sold at $5, so his individual producer surplus equals the price received minus the cost, right? 30 minus 5, right? 30 minus 15 gives you 15. 30 and 5 and so on. So the total producer surplus 25, 35, 40, 45, right? So this actually costs them, but we don't add that into that for some damn reason. That's the way they do it. So when you get the problem, do it that way. Here it is, graphically, again, price of the book. We've got this producer surplus, and see how it increases. You went from 25 to 30. You can see how it increases, right? And here's what it looks like, aggregate. The aggregate producer surplus is right in here at $5, right? The price of a bushel of wheat. Now, this is going to set us up for the next chapter. We start talking about meddling with markets. Producer surplus rises if the price increases. This is what's gained by new sellers, right? And this is the increase to the original sellers, okay? When you make a movement along the supply curve, not an increase in supply, that would look like a leftward movement of the entire graph, right? The entire supply. Always make that distinction. Total surplus is the sum of producer and consumer surpluses, right? That's the area of this triangle, this entire triangle, right? How do we figure that out? Well, you know how to figure out the area of a triangle. Are you in favor of legalizing the sale of kidneys? Why or why not? This is another classic. My back's killing me. Another classic in the realm of economics, because, and we're going to talk about it when you get into chapter 6 in elasticity. I'm going to go through 4 and 5 today, but when we get to elasticity, well, kidneys are, no matter what the price, you're going to buy a kidney, right? So should we allow people to sell them? Do you support the move to distribute organs in the United States based on net benefit rather than simply who's been waiting on the waiting list longest? Why or why not? Well, what the hell does that mean? Net benefit. That sounds subjective. I love talking about this because I can't remember. David Crosby got a liver. He was a drunk like me. Who else got one? Oh, Mickey Mantle, who was a baseball player and just a legendary alcoholic, and he got he controversially got a organ a liver transplant at the end of his life. Should they have gotten those? They happen to be on the list, or how did that work? Well, the Austrians would always say, no, you have to allow the price, the price of kidneys to set how they're distributed. It's a better, it's not perfect, but it's better than a board of kidney distributors who are going to come up with some some equation to try to figure out who's the net, gets the net benefit. You end up with all kinds of corruption and awful things happening. And so the prices, we would say that the price is always a better mechanism than any kind of a committee, because committees make mistakes and committees are capable of being corrupted. Now, if the price is very high, some people aren't going to get kidneys. But I think that the marketplace is a better arbiter of that. And also, if it's your brother or sister who's going to give you one, they're going to give you one. Markets are efficient because they maximize total surplus. You see, 3 ways you might unsuccessfully try to increase total surplus. You could reallocate consumption amongst consumers, reallocate sales amongst sellers, and change the quantity traded. Now, when you listen to Murray Rothbard this week, and I hope you saw this, it's in, let's go here. I don't want that. So this was last week's discussion. In the announcements tab, I want you to look at 2 things this week and make sure you do this. Tell me who you are. This is very important. And here's meddling with markets. Okay. So in here, I put up some things on Frederick Bastiat. And these are very short, so they're just quickies. If you're not familiar with Bastiat, here he is. He wrote this book, The Law. Yes, there it is. It's a great read. Bastiat was a Frenchman, and he came up with this idea of the broken window fallacy, which I want you to explore. And then the other announcement or the other assignment for this week are 2 lectures by Murray, but don't worry, they're shorter than usual. And what they do is they go over the oil business, but basically meddling with markets over the years, and Murray's really good on this.
Ever since about 1880, there have been predictions by so-called experts, usually technology.
I'm sorry about Murray. If you don't like, he's an acquired taste when it comes to his lecturing style, but maybe I am too. So I'm not gonna throw stones. Okay. But anyway, Murray starts out with the oil market. And if you didn't know this, OPEC is not the first cartel in the oil business. In America, there has not been a free market for crude oil ever, except maybe during the rise of Rockefeller's Standard Oil. But after the discovery, that gasoline was going to be used for cars and heating oil, and the different distillates of crude oil that were a miracle and still are. If you're here to badmouth oil, you get the wrong guy. Oil has been a miracle, and a miracle. It has brought more people out of poverty than anything else. So we can debate that. There's a good discussion to have. And if you think that you're an environmentalist, we all are. I am too. So obviously I have different view on hydrocarbons than maybe some people in the class. That's fine. But I would debate you vigorously on pulling people out of poverty and the advantages of crude oil. But we have always had something, and Murray's going to go over it. The oil market has been price controlled by quotas, trading in quotas. So, and set by the government. So here we go. Why reallocating consumption lowers surplus? All right, every student who buys a book at the market equilibrium has a willingness to pay of 30 or more, and every student who doesn't buy a book has the willingness to pay of less, right? So um, if we reallocate consumption, right? If a book is taken from Anna and given to Bob, here's what happens. You know, we lower consumer surplus by doing that. Oh, well, isn't that interesting, right? And that's an interesting phenomenon that you can extrapolate to taxation if you want to. But it is that this phenomenon is I don't want you to get mired in the mathematics of it. I just want you to understand that it exists. Now they're going to ask you a few questions in the homework on how to measure it. Fine, but so why reallocating sales lowers producer surplus? Now you can see here's the loss over here. Yvonne is made to sell the book instead of Xavier. Any student who sells a book at equilibrium has a lower cost than any student that keeps the book. So there you have it. That's an interesting concept, and it's really teeing up the next the next chapter, which is about meddling with markets. Anyone who wouldn't have bought the book has a willingness to pay of less than $30, and anyone who wouldn't have sold has a cost of more than $30. Right? How interesting. Competitive markets are usually efficient. Krugman and Wells say this, and then they basically find inefficiencies everywhere. I wish they just stuck with that statement because it's true, and they don't argue it, and then they do argue it with their actions. So it's much easier to believe that markets are more efficient than meddling with markets, as I'm about to really show you. They allocate consumption of a good to the potential buyers who most value it. They allocate sales to potential sellers who most value the right to sell the good, e.g. those who have the lowest cost. They ensure that all transactions are mutually beneficial. This is the value proposition. We both walk away happy. Every consumer who makes a purchase values the good more than every seller who makes the sale. This makes Krugman and Wells sound not like Keynesians. They sound like Austrians here, but they soon leave the reservation. Equity and efficiency. Efficiency is important. Here's where we go into la la land. But society, what is society? I don't even know what that is. Society is made up of individuals making choices. So I don't get what this thing society is, and society, because it doesn't exist, it doesn't care about things. Individuals care about things. Individuals care about equity, yes. Society as a whole doesn't agree on equity. The individuals that make up this thing called society never agree on equity. What's equity? What's fair? That's ridiculous. My idea of fair is not your idea of fair. I think that you know we can discuss that. What if everyone got what they deserved? It'd be different. Sometimes societies choose to have governments intervene in markets to increase efficiency. In this country, that is almost all the time, even though it reduces efficiency. I almost put up the discussion this week of tell me one product, good or service that doesn't have some kind of government intervention in it, whether it be taxes on gasoline or regulations or what have you. Well-functioning markets are effective because of property rights and economics goals. Now they go back, after this weird equity and efficiency thing. This is why it's so easy to be a libertarian, because you can just go, no, that's just not, that doesn't make any sense to me. And then you get back, they're back to property rights. Well, if there's property rights, if property rights are first in the hierarchy, okay, that means zoning shouldn't exist, right? And I can go into this. If I buy a piece of property up in Aspen and I want to build a high rise for low income housing, they will stop me at gunpoint. Do you realize that? And if I went to Aspen and I dug a hole and I began to build what I consider a low-income housing project that was 14 stories high, because I want to live with the people I work with, because that's what I love doing. And I decided, and you could add the racial element if that's what's fun for you, but I happen to love living with all different races. That's my thing. And so I'm going to build this thing on Main Street in Aspen because I bought the property. I own it. They will stop you. And if you continue to build that building, they will come with guns and stop you. Don't forget that zoning is eventually ends up with guns. That's what happens. Force. So property rights, we believe in property rights in this country, or we did, not so much anymore because of a number of different situations. But well-functioning markets are effective because property rights are tantamount. I'm getting a toll-free call and I just can't even, flipping me out. We have a landline here, and all it is for telemarketers. So economic signals, this is pricing. That's the other part of that. So as you can see, I'm very passionate about property rights. Very passionate. You own yourself. You own your. This is if there are two parts of libertarianism. One of them is the absolute property rights. I'm allowed to shoot dope if I feel like it. It's my body. You can't stop me from doing what I want. Now, the only other the other part of being a libertarian is of course, I'm not allowed to hurt you in any way. I can't. It's called the non-aggression principle. So property rights. I own my body. I own this house. You know, don't come on down this driveway if you mean me harm. Right? And so the non-aggression principle and the absolute hierarchy of property rights. That's basically what this country is based on. Freedom. Private property rights create and protect incentives to trade with others and to innovate. I own what I protect my incentives to trade with others and to innovate. I own what I create, right? The rights of owners of valuable items, whether resources or goods, to dispose of those items as they choose. I can do what I want. I can sell my house to whoever I want to. I can build here whatever I want to. I can drill. I can mine here. Oh, we're having a big argument about mining in Glenwood Springs. These are property rights. You own the property. Unfortunately, the mine we're talking about is on public land, which should never exist. If you don't, I was talking with someone last night about public land and how it's a bad idea. And what I always use as a comparison is, in this town we have the caverns. We have the fairy caves up there that you can take a tram up, and it's great. And they have an amusement. My kid's up there today. Alice is up there with her little friends, and they they go up there, and you can check out the caves or whatever. But it's a naturally beautiful place that is privately owned. Compare and contrast that with the falls over here. I can't remember. It eludes me. Go to any park. Go to Maroon Bells. You have to take a prison bus to get in there. You have to wait in line. You have to all of that stuff. If the private market took care of the national parks, they'd be so cool. Instead, they're shitty. So, and we can discuss that. Hanging Lake, you got to take the prison bus to get to it. You got to make an appointment to go hike it, and it's if someone took that over, like the people who did the park up there, the fairy caves, if they did that, they would make some really cool parking area that blended right into the environment, and it would be green and cool and all that. Then you'd have one trail for you and your dog if you're a dog person, and there'd be another trail for like mountain bikers, and there'd be another trail for people who just wanted to walk, and they'd be different prices, and and you get up to the lake, and there'd be a neat restaurant nestled in the woods that some kind of rainforest thing. I mean, it'd be cool. Um, it'd be Walt Disney like, and yeah, that may turn you off, but I promise you, a lot of people would like that, and I think it'd be a better solution. So, which is the best way for society to distribute the goods? Free market outcomes should not be tampered with. This, I love teaching this course because this right here is not from Karl Marx, but is often attributed to Karl Marx. A Frenchman actually said it during that after Marx and Engels wrote Das Kapital, which you should read if you want to really understand Marxism and the socialist idea. This is the socialist idea: from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Now, I will challenge you not only to read Solzhenitsyn and to read about socialism, especially chapter 10 in Hayek's Road to Serfdom, but from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, ends up, if you think about it and you sit and think about it, you have to use force for that to work. So from that seemingly lovely statement, it ends up murderous. The more I thought about it, the more I thought, oh my God, that's really sick. Because one way or another, you're going to have to do this at the end of a gun. And that's what's happened all over the world when this attitude is approached as an ideological necessity, and that's sort of we have a limited amount of this going on right now, but a lot of it isn't. It's coerced, and of course, a lot of people like me say taxation is theft. I would rather give people charity the way I want to give it to them. But this is force. This is what this means if you think about it. So distribute goods so that society's total happiness is maximized, even if it requires taking some from the wealthiest to give to the poorest. C and B are the same. That's it. So you have A, and then you have B, C, D, E, F, G. Any way you want to put this, it's the same thing. It always requires force because you're going to, and you can hate the wealthy. Something to think about when you think about this, if you sit and think about it, and this is what George Orwell came up with when he talks about the road to Wigan Pier, or when he wrote The Road to Wigan Pier, which is a great book. He also wrote Animal Farm, and he wrote 1984 and some other books that were fantastic. But he was a socialist until he died. And a lot of people don't think he was. But what he discovered when he wrote The Road to Wigan Pier was that the hierarchy of the socialist movement was he didn't like them. when he thought about it more and more, and he wrote about it later on, he said, what I noted was that they didn't necessarily love the poor, they hated the rich. And there's so think about this when you think about your own situation. Um, do you embrace socialism because you love the poor, or do you embrace it because you hate the rich? And there's a very, very important difference there, because one has to do with resentment and the other one has to do with empathy. So I love the poor, and I can prove that because I roll up my sleeves and I help them. And those are my people in the, not only the poor, but the disadvantaged, the recovering alcoholics. And, you know, this guy Floyd would have been my guy if I wish I could have sponsored him. Maybe he'd be alive today. But that's something to think about. You know, resentment is not a good way to run a government. So, and that's a lot of what's going on today is resentment. Doesn't work economically either. Equilibrium prices signal to resources exactly where they're most valued. An economic signal is any piece of information that helps people make better economic decisions. Prices are so important. They signal something. This is where Murray or me as an Austrian would say the price system is essential, and this is where socialism gets off the rails. How do you figure out prices? Well, it turns out you can't. Even with a supercomputer, the calculation problem is too great. It doesn't work. And if you think we aren't a socialist country, then you haven't thought about the Fed. The Fed sets the price for money, which is basically the price for everything. So when you have a board of men and women sitting somewhere setting the price of money, you do not have a free market. Okay, that's not. So when people tell me that capitalism has failed, I say, I don't know. It sounds to me like you're pointing at a cow and describing a chicken. We're not talking about the same thing. We haven't had anything close to capitalism in this country since at least 1913, which is the latest iteration of a central bank setting the price for money. So we can, that's a subject for a dissertation or a book, but it's something that I want you to think about as we go forward in this class, at least. And I'm sure you've never heard that before. Maybe some of you have. I don't want to act that. I'm not that smart. Why good economic signals matter? Prices. Here's where they talk about prices. They translate complex information into easy signals for producers. Once again, Krugman and Wells, here's the announcement. The Federal Reserve held interest rates near zero. I got my little thing here near zero, and projects that they will remain there through at least 2022. So if you are a saver, you will be punished until 2022. The market is now in the green. It's up, which is what I thought would happen today. I have a market. My 86-year-old dad and I talk every morning at about 5 a.m. here. It's 7 o'clock in Florida where he is, because that's where all the old people are. No, I'm just kidding. But we talk about the market, and I didn't want to. I wanted to buy a few things today just because I thought I'd make 25 cents, because I knew the market was going to turn around after the Fed announcement, and I was right and he was wrong, so I'm happy. But I didn't buy anything. Anyway, so there you go. The Federal Reserve has set the price of money at zero, or near zero, for the next year or two, whatever that means. That means that if you're interested in saving money in a bank, you won't. You'll just go spend it. And that's a bad idea. It's consumerism is not what we're looking for here. Anyway, savings turn into investment, which turns into goods and services. I look at things from a producer's, production standpoint, whereas the Keynesian looks at things from the consumption standpoints. It's two sides of a coin. So, but we agree on this: prices translate complex information into an easy signal. Profits rise when consumers want more of that industry's products. Profits decline. In Murray's lectures, he talks about total revenue. That's what I'm most important, as a capitalist, I'm most interested in total revenue. TR, price times quantity, equals TR. P times Q equals TR. The high price of ice in post-Katrina New Orleans, that was a hurricane, if you don't remember, made it more attractive for firms to provide ice where society needed it most. People trucked ice in. You say, oh, well, they're price gougers. Well, get over it. Jesus. Maybe they made some money and saved it and did something good with it, like gave it to their church or helped a poor person. Think, pair, share. Discuss with you. Are you in favor of price gouging? Here we are. And maybe I'll put up an article on price gouging because it's an absurdity. You have to let the price mechanism work for a variety of reasons, but mostly because it's the best way to adjudicate how to keep things on the shelves. Markets aren't always efficient. Sometimes they fail. I don't think so. Not completely. When markets are inefficient, they are missed opportunities. Some people could be made better off without making other people's worse off. We'll learn about market failures later from Mr. Krugman and Dr. Wells. They find market failures everywhere. I disagree. So that is chapter 4. Let's move on to chapter 5. Again, make sure you listen to Murray. Now we're going to start to talk about my favorite subject, and almost every libertarian's favorite subject, price controls and quotas. And it's so funny that a Keynesian textbook has an entire chapter on this, and it's very early in the book. Excuse me, a quarter of the way in. So here you are. You've got to. I'll put me up there. That better. Well, what are you going to learn? What's a market intervention, and why are price controls and quantity controls the two main forms it takes? Who benefits and who loses? Why are economists skeptical, and why do governments undertake them? Okay. And I want you to keep in mind something I think I said in yesterday's, when I put up the new discussion. Remember that politicians deal with votes. That is their currency, and nothing. You're going to watch it happen. The Federal Reserve, the man who's in charge of the Federal Reserve is a man by the name of Powell. Before him was a woman by the name, I can't remember her name now. I can see her face. There was a woman and another man named Bernanke, and then another guy named Greenspan. All of them were appointed by the president. So when someone says to you that the Federal Reserve is an independent bank, how do you square that circle? They are appointed by the president. So when the president starts tweeting that he's going to fire Powell and all this kind of shit, the Federal Reserve reacts to that. They don't want to lose their jobs. So, pay attention to incentives. So there's how we get started. This is a beauty. Back. This is, it's more my neck from looking at screens. Interference in markets has consequences. Yes. Because of rent control policies, and affordable and available rental apartments hard to find in New York City. So Krugman starts off, boom, he's a New Yorker, although he and his wife have a place on Nantucket. They've become very wealthy writing for the New York Times and other, doing other things, writing books mainly. So what is rent control? Well, let's find out. Rent control is a type of price control, right? Price control is a legal restriction on how high or low a market price may go. There are two main types: a price ceiling, a maximum price sellers are allowed to charge for a good or service. Okay, this is a price ceiling, a maximum price sellers are allowed to charge. This is rent control. Thou shalt not charge more than $800 for a one-bedroom apartment, right? It's usually set below the equilibrium price, all right? A price floor is the minimum price buyers are required to pay for a good or service, usually set above the equilibrium, right? That's the minimum wage, is a price floor, as I discussed last night. I hope I said it that way, God. Yeah, so the minimum wage is a price floor. So we're setting the price of wages above the equilibrium. And I think you already saw if you glanced at the discussion when I put it up, or maybe you are now, you'll see that. Market prices do not necessarily please buyers or sellers. They may lobby the government to help them by altering the price, right? This is when you get into something other than free market. This is when you say, well, the healthcare system, capitalism failed in the healthcare system. Well, it turns out that's not even remotely true. If you study the healthcare system, if you want to call it a system, if you study the price of healthcare going back to when the government decided to stick their nose in it, you go back to at least 1964 when Medicare and Medicaid became law, and immediately there was all kinds of government lobbying by different interest groups in order to change the price and quantity of healthcare services. So you don't have a market price in healthcare. You have a government price in healthcare. That's I think anything else, describing it any other way is simply a counterfactual. So here's one. This is going to be apartments. Now, this is what's hard to get your head around. If you live in the valley, and every mountain community, I don't know, there's some people from Steamboat and elsewhere, there's always a shortage of something called affordable housing. This is so amazing to me because no one can define affordable housing. They just know that it's less than what they're paying. What should you pay for housing in a mountain town? I don't know. A third of your income. It's purely subjective. So the idea of affordable housing is sort of an absurdity because it's sort of I'll know it when I see it kind of thing. And sort of what they do is they get a town council together, or they get a committee together, and they decide this is affordable. And you may say, well, I agree, or I disagree, or if it's me paying, it should be cheaper. I know that. Without government intervention, the market for apartments, let's say this is Aspen, the market for apartment reaches equilibrium at point E, with a market rent of $1,000 and 2 million apartments. Well, maybe it's 2,000, but you get it, right? We know, we've already learned supply and demand. We understand equilibrium. There's your market clearing price. All right. If you're a capitalist or a free market guy, you're like, don't fool with that. If you screw with that, you're going to have problems. Well, politicians can't resist. They have people screaming at them, going, "We can't afford to live here." And what I would say in this particular situation, well, we need to take a look at some other things. And this is why I love talking about this in this valley, because um, we have a bus system called RAFTA. I would like to rename it "Screw You," because it's the worst thing I've ever seen in the world, and it is a function of this. The reason that you have RAFTA dragging people up from Rifle in our town, that's like an hour away, so that they can work up in Aspen. The reason that you have that is because you have zoning in Aspen for Hollywood people. So, and this is the really juicy part that I love to bring up. The Hollywood elite on the left, or the wealthy billionaires on the left, are keeping out the very people that they wish to help with all of their legislation in Washington. They're keeping them out of their town with zoning. So, like I said earlier in the lecture, it is a form of price control. So if you say, well, you can only build on 2 acres, or you can only build, you're effectively setting a price ceiling for rent, right? Or you're effectively saying, thou shalt not build affordable housing in Aspen because we just don't want you here for whatever reason. We want everybody's house to be on 2 acres because it looks better. Forget about the whole racial aspect and everything else, and the fact that 82 is clogged up with cars every morning. And RAFTA, I pay taxes to RAFTA to move people from Rifle. I pay a property tax on this house I'm sitting in Glenwood Springs, so that we can bring the bellboy, or the people that are cleaning the hotels in Aspen, from Rifle to Aspen. I don't want to do that at all. So the market after the price control. So the price ceiling, here's the price ceiling. Thou shalt not charge more than 800, right? Creates a persistent shortage of 400,000 units, right? So 400,000 households who want apartments at the legal rent of 800 but can't get them. Why? Well, think of it logically. If I'm only going to get 800 for rent and $1,000 is a 10% profit, I'm not going to do it. If I'm a landlord, screw it. I'm out. I'm going somewhere else. I don't need to. I'm not going to build a building. I'm not going to. I'm not going to maintain the ones I have. So you create all kinds of unintended consequences because these things come about through good intentions. It's just that people don't think them through, and they don't